Welcome back to the Jewish Futurism Lab, where we unpack Torah, tech, and tomorrow. I'm your host, Mike Wirth, Jewish futurist, community artist, and design educator, coming to you from Crown Town, Charlotte, North Carolina. Today, I want to invite you into a project that's been shaping my brain for the last couple of years. It's called Jewish Ritual by Design. It's a working title, but it all started at a residency I had in Greensboro, where I created a brand new Jewish ritual called High and Low. And since then, I've been building a framework and looking at UX and systems design and Jewish ethics. So let's get into it, y'all. Welcome, friends. So this is the Jewish Futurism Lab. I'm Mike Wirth, and today we're talking about Jewish ritual and the design of Jewish ritual. Okay, it's really, really an interesting topic, and I just find it so fascinating. And since it was introduced to me and I started to work with it, I've just really found that as a designer, it's a really familiar space for me. It's really just a place where I can apply things I know from UX design, graphic design, systems design, right? Coding, interaction, all sorts of things that I've now come to learn and appreciate. And I can apply them to my Judaism, and that's so, so wonderful. But I want to take you a little bit back in time and give you a little context of what this is, and we'll talk about what it means to create a ritual. And I'm going to share with you some of the insights and then even tell you guys about an upcoming class that I have in 2026 this year in June up at Lair House in Massachusetts. Okay, so we'll get to that. But first, I want to take you on a little history tour here, going back in time a couple years ago, 2 years ago. And I was in an artist residency, and this is really where all this stuff really started to crystallize for me. So we're talking about a place called the Social Practice Institute, and this was with the Greensboro Contemporary Jewish Museum. And it was housed in this former thrift store, which is now a museum that is full of living objects and stories. And you really kind of understand the idea of the relationship between material and art in this place, because everything inside that space, if you're blessed enough to have a residency, is available to you to use for art projects. So it was really cool to be able to do that. And it's in this context, in this space, this 10-day residency that I had with three other artists. I've mentioned it before on the podcast. Um, and I was given the opportunity and the challenge to create a ritual, and it's something called High and Low, and it's something I do on Shabbat with my family. And there's a cool story behind that, but really fun to take this idea and think about, well, how do I formalize this ritual and make it into something that not only I can use, but other Jews can use as well. So we're going to talk about like the parameters of Jewish ritual design, because there's layers and levels in here. We can't just kind of remix and reboot everything. That's not appropriate. There's certain things that we got to leave in place that are halakhic, for example, right? Like following the law, the Torah. And then also minhag being tradition, right? So like what have people done for a long, long time? And then also what's left, right? Like what's in other spaces that we can use. And that comes from being empathetic towards ourselves, our families, and our communities, right? To see, well, what are our needs? What do we need as a Jewish community, as Jewish people, to take from this ritual to enhance our connection, right? Our experience to making mitzvah, right? And repairing, right? Making tikkun. That's the whole job of the Jewish people, is to repair and fix and to make things stronger, right? So design plays a huge, huge role. I really thought with this idea of high and low that I wanted to design a ritual or do something that like captured the idea of like what were the highs and the exciting moments that like elevated our spirits, our neshama, right, during the week, every week with my family. I thought I had to think about that for myself, my kids, right, like they all, my partner, all share answers. And then also the low. What was the things that kind of was like, that really made the week tough, or, felt wrong or messy, or just something that was just bad right that week. And let me tell you, like, this is such a wonderful thing in terms of being a social practice, because now it like takes people in a family, right? That's my audience, and we're able to open up in a way that just the basics of Shabbat, right? The baruchas and the things that we do normally, the traditions, the halakhic things we need to do are wonderful, right? And our gateways and passages and portals to higher transcendence and feelings and spirituality, but then and rest. But then also at the same time, none of that's addressing like the here and now, right? Like specifically. So high and low allows us to do that, which is great. So we go through the process of it of Shabbat, and then we do high and low at the end, and that leads to like a really nice like opening of connection to again my loved ones to understand like what's going on inside their world. How are they moving through life, through space, through their feelings. So the art that I was doing was the ritual itself, was like capturing that thing that we were doing already. It just was like, okay, so the context here is that like my partner is not Jewish, but does Shabbat with us, and as a family. So like we're a blended family, and we bring together different traditions. So she had said, "Hey, I do this thing called high and low, not necessarily on Shabbat, right? Not being Jewish, but when I speak to somebody, right, like a loved one, I go, "What was your high and low this week, or this day, or this month?" Like there was just that time frame. So it fit really nicely to the weekliness of Shabbat. And yeah, it just was all of a sudden now this nice fitting thing. And I thought, well, let's make it more Jewish, right? Like, what can we do to really kind of blend it in so that it's now a mainstay and design it to work for my audience, right? My partner, not Jewish, my kids, Jewish, me, Jewish, right? And then ultimately share it out to the larger world, which is fantastic. So that was a really great thing that I was working on. And then even since then, like it's given me just like a space to really think about, well, how do I design Jewish objects in real life and speculatively, right? So I do fictional things as well. But I have my cosmogranite, for example. If you've seen my illustration on my website on the Jewish Futurism page, you'll see my cosmogranite, which is this really great thing. By the way, there's a Jewish Futurism book that's going to be coming out, really exciting. A catalog of that art, stories behind it, right? Like what the futurism aspect is, how it feeds into history, the present, all that great stuff. But the cosmogranite being one of my favorite speculative Jewish objects, right? Like obviously is a fruit, has symbolic representation in the here and now, but to then make it this like high-tech spiritual object that can control things across the universe, well, that's awesome, right? Like that's me practicing Jewish futurism, evolving the Jewish story. But then I thought of, well, this cosmogranite, what if I made it in real life? So I thought, well, cosmogranite can do anything because it's kind of holographic, and I wanted to make it then into a sukkah. So I received a grant, and then a year after my residency at the Social Practice Institute, I was then selected here in Charlotte to create my cosmogranite installation, which was a sound-driven, audio-driven. So when you would sing, there was LEDs, right? I outfit all these LEDs onto this geodesic dome and use pool noodles to diffuse them. By the way, that's a nice thing. If you're in light art, you know that like stuff like that really comes in handy. Um, and creating this cosmogranite and then running it off of microcontrollers that took in sound as well as motion. I experimented with both, coded both things to see how they'd work. And then, this thing ultimately became like this statue installation, type of thing that people could interact with. And it was cool. I have video of it and all that great stuff. But yeah, I wanted to then like really see what could this object be in real life, more so than just this speculative thing. So that's the whole aspect of this, is that as a designer, I'm thinking of these things, right? I'm following a design process to develop them, to ideate them, right? I'm thinking divergently first, so like what's cool and interesting, and then being convergent and coming back later and being critical and analyzing my design choices, but then also seeking out research and finding evidence so that I could help support my design decisions. And I think that's a really, really important thing. Also at the Social Practice Institute, just kind of jumping back through time, working with my cohort, we also designed a mezuzah together, and we put the mezuzah on the door. It was cool because we had to use items from the museum And we made this like avocado egg shape type thing out of all sorts of broken pieces of dishes and glass. Because like if a glass or a dish is to break in the museum, it's actually in the constitution of the museum that that item has to be stored and saved for artists to use. It's true. And that's a really fascinating thing because now all of a sudden you have these like vast resources that are very meaningful to the place. They're not just like trash and they don't mean nothing. So we created this mezuzah, really fun, and then inside we put like a scroll. Obviously, this wasn't halakhic, right? Because the scroll isn't official, but it's the vessel and like the intention of it all, and the form, which I found to be very interesting. So, right, like couldn't be fully kashrut for all sorts of users, but could be an interesting idea. So again, you got to try this stuff, like to see, well, what are parameters and things. So I like that project because, well, it was fun to do, it was beautiful, but then also and collaborative, but then also at the same time, it taught me about, well, what parameters should I be placing on the reinvention of Jewish ritual, right? It's important that we do this within ethical frameworks, right? Within halakha and within minhag, right? Halakha being the law and minhag being tradition. But then, think at the same time, like in your own life, have you ever like witnessed new Jewish ritual unfold in front of your face, right? I can think of an example in the early 1990s. My wonderful cousin, who is now a cantor and a beautiful Jewish soul and teacher and friend, um, and she had put an orange on our Seder plate at Pesach, Passover one year, okay, and then made this statement about what it represented, right? It has many layers of representation, but it's meant to represent women entering the clergy, repressed peoples, right? Like it's a symbol of supporting of justice, right? Social justice, which I thought, oh yeah, cool, But when I tell you that, like, some folks were like, huh, interesting. And then others in my family had the face of grim death, like, what did you just do? Right? You just committed the ultimate shanda, right? Like, just absolutely doing something really bad on Pesach. And it's like, oh, gosh, what's going on? We've had this story for thousands of years. No, we don't add things, right? Like, so anyway, at one point that was like radical and new, and now 30 years later, it's not so radical anymore, right? It's almost accepted tradition. You can Google that and you can see that there's now been many interpretations across the Jewish world, in terms of the adaptation of the Seder plate with the orange or not, right? But at one point, friends, like somebody thinking about that, that was Jewish futurism. That was Jewish futuristic ritual design in action, right? Happening before things unfolded. And somebody said, whoop, let's put it down on the plate. Okay, so like that's the thing that we're going to be engaging with here, is like thinking about it in a design imagination space, right? Like sketching it out to see, well, what would work, what would not, and whatnot. And then lastly, I created my cosmic talit, which I made into both a silk shawl as well as a sweatshirt, which is a lot of fun. But in my Jewish futurist artwork, I had created myself as the subject, right? It's an autobiographical story, but set in the future, and that person is my descendant, right? So I'm their ancestor. So I thought, like, well, let's give them some cool tech. And I thought with the cosmogranite, a Hamsa like hologram shield, which is so cool. Think like Guardians of the Galaxy or like Ben 10 if you're into the cartoons and things. Google that if you don't know what I'm talking about. Ben 10 has this like cool digital shield. It was an inspiration for the Hamsa shield, but then also the Talit, which once it's on, like allows the wearer to be like covered in like a space armor, right? Travel anywhere and through anything, no radiation, no nothing, right? It's like I remove all the problems of space by just having this special talit. So really cool, right? Um, so again, like this, all these experiments that I've done have played with the parameters of ritual design that I've now come to really understand, and will explain to y'all here, right? It's important, but being speculative and having pie in the sky is a really important thing. The good question, right, is like, what could Jewish ritual look like in futures that we haven't lived yet? So that's where a lot of these things came from, which is super sci-fi, tech-inspired, Star Trek, Star Wars, Arcane from League of Legends, space stuff with magic and powers and fantasy, robots, like all this stuff is in there, for sure, in terms of the connection. But then rooting it in Judaism, that's been the fun that I've been having, and I've learned a lot. So, yes, uh, making the high and low ritual in these objects, right? Like, I wanted to really make this distinction between what would be like fun Jewish sci-fi and then responsible ritual design, right? Like, there's a fine line to find what that was. So that pushed me to really think of like, okay, I need a framework. I need some sort of filter. I need some sort of like process criteria for which I'm to look at this and the lens. So that's where the Jewish futurist criteria and checklist and frameworks really started to develop. And then with Hidor Olam being the educational connection, right? So like education, spirituality, and creativity all overlap into one. So that's the whole premise for where all this stuff is going. So super, super excited about that. And at the same time, I started to like think about uh, just Shabbat in terms of how a UX designer would look at it, right? And the systems thinking hat is on here, right? So in UX and user experience design, we talk about things like user journeys. So and personas first, like who is our user, right? We have to think about like, all right, so Shabbat, who is our user? And we have to be very specific and say, all right, is this Shabbat for my family or is this Shabbat for like the world or even my community? So all of that has different answers if you were to ask that same question. So you got to think really clearly and critically, okay, where am I doing this? And start small. I would recommend, right? Don't go for the big, glorious, world-changing Shabbat, but go with like your own practice, for example. What do you want out of Shabbat that you're not getting right now? Right? What are some pain points or like hiccup points during the Shabbat process that make you feel like, maybe what's going on, Things like that. These are really great questions that we're gonna talk more about here. So, right, we've got user personas, we've got user journeys, right? We have things like onboarding. So, how does somebody get into Shabbat? How do they start it, right? What are friction points? What are moments of delight, right? Where it's just like, this is why I do this. Again, all this thought has to go into it. And looking at things through a systems thinking lens, we look at how all the pieces, like the people, the spaces, the parameters, the rules, stories, right? How those things interact and oscillate over time, right? So from beginning, middle, end, right? And then how do we get back into it if it's a cycle, for example? So these are all really like, so time and space and tracking of position and of the user, right? And having them understand or understanding where they are mentally, right, in that process. That really helps us understand. So it's like, this is in UX when we develop apps and websites, we think, okay, we want people to have a really smooth experience buying a t-shirt, right? So, all right, what do they got to go through to get the t-shirt? They got to go to the website, then they got to find the shop, then they got to find the shirt in the shop, okay? Like how does all that happen? And can we reduce the number of steps? Can we make it easy? Can we do things that will enhance the ability, not just so that the user just boom gets to it fast, but has a good experience and feels more deeply connected to the brand, right? Like no light work, okay? It's not just this simple functional stuff, is that it actually has to echo and continue the brand story, right? Of like why we're there. We go and buy a shirt from a place because we believe in it. So the process of it shouldn't just be like Shopify's version, right? It should be thought of as, well, here's how the brand is treating the sale of a t-shirt, right? So maybe they say something not just like, get your size, and maybe they use language like, this comes from recycled places, it comes from a fair use, like they're elevating their values at the same time as selling a shirt, okay? So anyhow, um, you know, these things are really critical to UX and systems thinking. And I thought, wow, Shabbat is like perfect for this. It's a 25-hour experience with a definite start and end. It has clear touch points. It has props. It has scripts and a weekly feedback loop. So we're gonna like hit it again, the next week. And gosh, you think about users and things like that. So I started to think about like, what if we could make Shabbat like a UX case study? And we could map the journey from Friday afternoon, stress to Saturday night, like exhale, like whoo, just really, really great. Like, what does it feel like? What are the steps, the milestones in Shabbat from Friday to Saturday night, right? Um, and yeah, then we start to look at, well, which users as we go through that. So if we're thinking for ourselves here, like I'm the user, right? Like I just want to do this for myself, or maybe my family. So that adds more people. So if I'm doing this for myself and my family, I have to think like, again, what do I want out of Shabbat? What do I crave? Where are points where I could, um, like I hit a snag, or like I'm a little lost on this part. Maybe your Hebrew's not great. Maybe you don't know the melodies for things. You forget the order of process. Like it's not just like, oh, let's make a cheat sheet and do it. It's like, well, what do you want to have those moments do for you to make them more elevated? So there's things we could do, right, to push and change and tweak the ritual so that it can really feel much more meaningful if that's exactly what you're going for, right? So hear me in that we're really trying to set a goal and understand a user's journey through a process and address their needs and adjust the ritual to suit their needs and test, right? That's the process. Shake and repeat. That's really how it goes. Is try it, imagine it, try it, test it, evaluate it, move on to the next iteration, right? And like keep it pushing. That's really really important thing. And notice like where you're great and where you're not feeling so great. Again, it's important. And then just uh, see if like the pain points bump into parameters. So for example, if there's a rule that you have to follow, if it's like, oh, why am I not hitting this? Or why isn't it really feeling like a connection? It just feels like I have to do it. So that's a great design opportunity to think about, well, what does the user need? What can I design to change here? Is there something in minhag, in tradition, that is an evolution of halakha, right, to like suit different cultures and times and places? Um, and which are design decisions that we never examined. There's parts of Shabbat that aren't amazing for every type of person. So, for example, in UX, we think about all kinds of users, and there could be accessibility issues that some users have. So how does Shabbat address that, for example, right? Like, does the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 503, absolutely connect to like for the web, or is there like WCAG, WCAG, and then also, are there these accessibility standards applied to this ritual, right? Probably not. They weren't thought of way back when. But they're also loose enough that like, we could make things happen, and I'm sure people have come up with brilliant ideas, as time has gone on. So that's what's really important, is that as we make these design decisions, we have to think about all these layers, okay, and then negotiate between them. So this is the backbone here of what I would say is like Jewish ritual design, right? Shabbat by design. Really, really interesting. Um, so let's talk a little bit about ethics and parameters and a little bit of framework here so we can pass through this and understand. So as you can understand how my brain is working here as I'm constantly looping back and thinking, oh, okay, I got to check to make sure this is cool. So you got to think about how to make a design brief for yourself. When you get a design brief from a client, it usually has requests, parameters, pain points, a style guide for their brand, objectives, KPIs, right? Key performance indicators, some sort of business case. So you're trying to like figure out, what does this client really need, right? And what can I do to help them out? Okay. Um, and this kind of three-layer ritual design framework started to make itself come into uh, structure, right? And if you're going to play in this speculative ritual design, whether it's Shabbat UX, or like me doing a geodesic Sukkot sukkah, right, or a futuristic mezuzot, a mezuzah, you need to know where the ethical and the halakhic, the law parameters exist, right? Like what's the sandbox you're going to play in? so you don't waste sand, right? Like, or you don't mess it up, or do something that hurts the system, or unknowingly. That's the really important part, is that you should always know if you're going to hurt the system. And if you do it knowingly, well, then, that's for you to to deal with and make teshuvah, right, on your own. So layer one, right, of this system is halakha, right? It is the legal framework, the mitzvot, right, the commandments. And again, mitzvot aren't just like rules. They really help us improve our behavior as human beings. If you really look at them, right, and like see them how they work in the Musar, ethical framework system, Jewish ethical framework system, and that then you have midot, you have characteristics, personal traits that you can work on. Your joy, your curiosity, your patience, your understanding, like all this stuff is in that space, and it's there for you to be better, if you're open to it, right? That's the whole thing, right? Um, and we want to create this do not casually alter layer, right? When we talk about halakha, we don't want to just like, by removing the kosher scroll and not following the rules, the halakha, as far as making the scroll for the mezuzah isn't kosher, right? So I couldn't then say, hey, yeah, here it is, right? That'd be naive of me to do. I'd have to understand and be very open with that idea, if as an artist, okay, if I was doing that, right? Um, and you know, uh, the we can argue about like what's in that space. There's definitely many layers of halakhic argument. I mean, you just look at the Talmud, the Mishnah, and then the Gemara with the commentary, and then the actual the Torah itself, right? The written down. That now we have, like, we have to know it's there. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. Okay. We want to make sure we're not stepping in it. That's the important part. Okay. And again, it's up to you to argue what you think is in that space or not, or how you want to approach it, and how you're going to like see the benefit for your user, even if that's you. Layer two, the next thing is the minhag. All right. So minhag is really like tradition, right? Tradition. It's a community's custom and a pattern, something that we've done, right? So this is like a pattern library in design. Like if I were to open up a book of patterns, we would see, here's the stuff that's been done. Reference, you can use it. Okay, that's minhag, right? It's like vernacular, right? Design vernacular. If I want a houndstooth pattern, I can find one and use it. And there's like an example that's agreed upon by the world of what houndstooth is. Okay, so there's things like that in minhag, but they also vary. So a caveat applied to that. So with these, you can remix these, and but you do it like in an informed way, and where you're literate to the law, right? And then you do it with humility and awareness of who it belongs to. So if I am somebody who has more of an Ashkenazi Jewish experience, and I want to adopt something that's, say, from the MENA region, right, the Middle East, North Africa, who are Mizrahi Jews, right? Mizrahi means east. So these are Jews of the East. They tend to be from the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, right? Other places, even India, Asia, as well as North Africa. But if I don't have that context and I've not been brought up with that, I'd be appropriating that type of a thing, and just I'd want to make sure that I was being exercising humility and being respectful of that, and I can learn it if I want to, but I should give it the due diligence. That's the whole point, is that, like, do the research is the really important part. So that's layer two, right? So it's a little bit more of a play space. And what that is really examples of what's been done, so that you can absolutely see, like, all right, what are some successful and unsuccessful examples of Jewish ritual reinvention or creation, frankly, and that should exist in the minhag, right, as reference for us. Cool. All right. So we've got like the unmovables with some debate. We've got some examples for layer two of like what you can do, good and bad. And then lastly here is really the free and open design space, right? So like everything around the mitzvah. So like that could be little things we could tweak. So it's like the pacing, the layout, the signage of things, the language, accessibility type of things, emotional tone, right? We could change the whole emotional tone of what's going on. And then how we get people involved, right? How could people participate more so right, in a Shabbat, if that's something that we're trying to do. These are the things that you want to experiment with and see. These are the tweaks, right, that you can do on existing things to push them to a place that you really want them to really work. And this is where speculative design like really truly lives. That's the DNA right there, is like know the system, right? Observe its parameters and its functions, align user needs, right? And then now tweak until you find the ultimate fitting Tetris compromise, right? That's the wonderful game about it. That's the pattern that you're going to be um, looking at. So I like to think of this as a visual of like concentric rings, right? Like a target. So the outer frame, the box of the sandbox, so to speak, or of the target, that's halakha, right? And I keep it as like a ring. It's not major, it's not super deep, it's just there. It's well defined. It's the border, okay? And it's just to like say these are the this is the fence, right? This is the place to stay within, okay? Like don't go too far, type of thing. And like that's okay. Again, it's up for negotiation and debate. That's up to you about how closely you look at halakha, and then also how what your intention is. If your intention is to like do real Jewish things that go out to the larger Jewish world, well then you got to follow this pretty closely, right? If not very strictly. But if not, if you're making a commentary or if you're doing something artistic that examines it or analyzes it or parodies it, okay, well then yeah, then you can dialogue with that in that way. But I think the whole point is like being open and clear with your intention, right? With your kavanah, I think is like a really important part. So yeah, I kind of say, be careful, right? Treat this with caution, okay? Then the next band inward from the outer ring is the minhag, right? And that's change with communal awareness, I would say, is like shorthand for that. Okay, and then from there, the inner, the target where we're looking, these are the inner design choices. And this is a space that's open for thoughtful experimentation. Okay, and then as time goes on, those radiate outward and they then become a part of the minhag. So like the middle, we're always aiming for the middle, right? It's like, whew, it's pushing now. So it's like a dartboard. That's the thing. That's the metaphor that I really like to think about. And I'm going to illustrate this and show students when I'm going to be teaching a class on June 24th at the Lair House, okay, up in Massachusetts, Somerset, okay, Massachusetts, Boston area, just outside of Boston. And it'll be a full class, 90 minutes on speculative ritual design, where I'll explore my crazy ideas, ground them in ethics and then in parameters, and then lead students to do their own crazy exploration, right? And push into their own worlds using themselves as the primary user, right? And then their family as well as secondary, if not primary users as well. So that we can like realistically effectively create a speculative ritual or update one in that parameter of time, right? We got to make that happen. And then the goal is that they take this out there, and I have my acolytes, right, that are going to be out there making this happen. And y'all, there's so many other great Jewish people doing so many awesome things that intersect with this work, and excited to join into that Lair House community. We did an episode on the history of the original Lair House that was in Frankfurt, right, in the Weimar Republic era between World War I and World War II. Really, really exciting idea that was very user centric. So, not lost on me that this is making sense and connecting here, and that Lair House is on my path, right, on my dance card for things that are really exciting about what's going on. So that's exciting and be coming up. I'll put a link to it in the description. And if y'all are in the area, come on out, come on out. So, because honestly, right, like folks can absolutely go nuts with Jewish design, right? I want that. I really, really want that. But we need to just get this sense first of like, what is the sacred structure and where is the creative space? Where is the sand in the sandbox, right? And what are you using for like molds, right? Your castle molds. That's your minhag to help kind of understand frameworks of where things are going. And then you can play, right, and be jazzy and be a little reckless. Okay. What was really cool was just recently I taught an hour session online with Judaism Unbound, during their Shavuot Live, which was a 25-hour nonstop learnathon all night, which was so cool. And I had just come back from Japan, so I was so tired and like jet lagged, and but I was so amped and so excited to connect with this community. So Shavuot Live, I talked all about Jewish futurism, talked about the projects and the things that I was mentioning before, and then got people excited about their own ritual design, which is really cool. So excited also to connect with that community. Um, and yeah, right. In that presentation, I was able to very much clearly define, here are the parameters of Jewish ritual design. Let's see what happens if we sketch inside these lines together, right? Um, so we walked through some halakha, some minhag, and then the open design space. And then, I asked people to kind of think about like what kind of ritual in their life might they want to think about altering or changing or creating anew. And this was something that people kind of did rhetorically to think through what was what, and then excited that at Lair House I'll be able to then create a larger interactive class, right, where we'll have like that direct feedback, which will be really, really wonderful. Um, and it was Shabbat, Seder's, life moments, Jewish prayer in the morning, wrapping tefillin, all this stuff that people were excited about. And then we asked like that same layered framework. What is truly non-negotiable, right, as far as law is concerned? Also, how does the community do it? How do different communities do it? Get perspective, get examples, right? Do the research, and then what's actually available as design space that no one's ever touched or I've never touched, right? Again, like the design of the ritual is for the user, not necessarily for the world. So being realistic about that is really good. So it was fun to, in that space, start to introduce this idea to folks and get them thinking about where that's going. And once these categories clicked in, that's when the creativity takes off. Like once all right, here are the rules, let's play. All of a sudden, it's a game, right? It has parameters. You can bounce the ball off the wall, and because the wall is always there, and you're just aware of what's going on. If you don't know if the wall's there, you're going to hold tight, like, what's going to get me, right? Um, and you know, uh, you can almost kind of imagine like a rabbi could see some redesign opportunities in things like the Amidah, right? Like what could happen there? How could we get more people to like participate in that prayer, or to you know uh, have it be a specific person's voice, right? Like, what does that prayer mean that then a specific person can take on the role of delivering that, right? These are just interesting things. And I'm not a rabbi, right? So it's like that's where this is so exciting, and to work with people who are in the clergy, right? To think about like, oh, because they obviously understand pastoral practice, right? And what people need, and how does Judaism answer need. I mean, that's the ultimate design information right there, right? So think about people like that as collaborators. And if you're a rabbi yourself and you're creative, oh my God, right? Love you. You're such a superhuman that like, please push this work, right? Make sure that you're doing as much creating as you are rabbiing. Okay, like that's a really, really important thing. And to be thoughtful and creative with these things, push, right? The creativity. That's what's so exciting. Um, and you know, artists and artistic thinking can really just blow this open. And you now have this canvas of hospitality and sound and spatial choreography. And then like teachers could could like how they could play with like pacing, or maybe explanation without kind of violate. Maybe they want to illustrate certain things to give context. So it's like they may see, oh well, while we're doing this I might wonder, well, why are we doing this? What does this matter? And then you can have the story in hand somewhere. Maybe somebody young in the family could can say, oh, and as a reminder that we do this because of so and so and blah blah blah, right? It's like all of a sudden now the teaching aspect goes, okay. Like when people feel connected to something, they're going to feel they have an understanding, right? They're going to feel in a greater way more connected, so that like this then lands the way it was intended to land, right? So that was a great session. And it really showed me that this framework is very teachable, right? And that people are hungry for it. It was so nice to get some emails and some messages after the session was over. People asking like, where does your class start, right? So yes, I heard you loud and clear. And thank you, right? Like this is, I'm a professor, so of course I'm sitting here in my lab working on it, developing, trying to get my paper ready for publication. Yeah, but yeah, I know this is really important work that's going to make a difference in our community. So we're going to really push it, right? And what's cool here is like one little thing I had in my notes was that like people aren't looking for permission to like blow up Judaism, right? Like ultimately, that's why I was worried. I was like, man, if I empower people here, they're going to do all sorts of wacky things, and it's going to be punk rock Judaism, where it's Wild West and there's no up or down anymore. Like the standard's lost, right? And I didn't want that because that could happen. But what people really crave is they love when they know the parameters that they then can go crazy within the space they're allotted, right? Because if you don't know where the boundaries are and you're like, oh, I'm going to go crazy, you go crazy in sometimes the wrong spot. So if you know where the right spot is, come on, that's a no-brainer, right? We love that. So great takeaway is that parameters build more creativity. I'm starting to see that because that when there's too much to do or too many places to start and go, you get choice paralysis. I suffer from that deeply. So it's like, oh, where do we start, right? Well, go with needs. Answer the futurist framework questions, right? Ask like, well, where am I? What do I need? What's my context? What's my here and now? Okay. What's halacha? What's minhag? Oh man. Once you can answer those questions, you have a way to move forward. I think that's amazing, right? I feel, I want to go do this. Yay, right? So excited about it. So I hope you are too, okay? Whether you're a writer or actor or a sculptor or a musician or whatever, that like you can, or even a rabbi, cantor, person sitting in the front row, wherever you are, that like this is something that you can activate and see like, oh, I could plug my part of myself into this. Okay. That's really cool. So we shift here to think, all right, Shabbat is now a lab, right? We have the framework in place. So now Shabbat becomes this thing we can fully evaluate and be critical of and really see like where's the shefa, right? Where's the flow? So I started to build out personas and like creating kind of composite characters to show how different types of brains and bodies will move through the Shabbat experience, right, from beginning to end. I mentioned before there's a flow. So we got these personas now of like, all right, well, who is this person, right? It's like your favorite character going through a story. What's going on there, right? Like you have expectations. Like Luke Skywalker is going to be good in this environment, but terrible in this environment. You almost wonder, like, if you like Sherlock Holmes, okay, what's Sherlock going to get into this time? Oh, he's going to this exotic place. Ooh, like all of a sudden, your persona of Sherlock in this new context is intriguing, right? So like that's important for us to use when we want to tell the story of what a user is thinking along the way, right? About how things go. So I thought like, maybe we could use like a secular person or like a culturally Jewish designer. Um, who's neurodivergent, craving rest but overwhelmed by long and seemingly unstructured rituals and like dense Hebrew that they just can't connect to. You know what I'm saying? Have you somebody like this, or maybe that's you, right? Like, or maybe it's at one point in your life. I've been there, right, where I've been like, oh, I don't know exactly what's going on. I was much younger, but yeah, I couldn't connect fully. And then another persona, right, could be a very deeply observant scholar, but they use a wheelchair and fully at home, right, in this liturgy. But often, they get excluded by the physical design of Jewish spaces sometimes, right? Obviously, Shabbat is like it's their home, so it's easier. But like, maybe they want to go to shul, to synagogue on Shabbat. In the wheelchair, like they've gotten better. I'm not saying these places are bad, but like how can we make that better, right? Or what if this individual was blind and they were called up to make an aliyah with the Torah, right? Like, okay, how would they access? We would have to get some sort of braille or some sort of system or something that could allow that to become accessible. I know these things are in place in many places, but it's like that's a layer that we could extend to other places and make it normal, right? Is what I'm saying. Today, what we're doing for accessibility things is we're making them normal. So, for example, information hierarchy on the internet has gotten stronger, right? In terms of like headers, subheaders, indentation, all that stuff. And I know we've had that for 100 years, right? And that's fine, but people are getting more adept to using those systems, hierarchical systems of information now, right? And they come in templates on software. And the beautiful thing about that is that that hierarchy translates wonderfully to a screen reader that then a person who is blind can read and fully understand websites that way. It's amazing that like we have this universality that comes from a tried and true structure, a hierarchy of information. So right there, friends, tells you that like we should have structures and hierarchies and things like that of information or accessibility built into as many aspects of Judaism and Jewish ritual as possible. So um, you think about these two types of folks, and then you want to run them through like a typical Friday night, and think about what their experience is, right? So, what's the transition from the work week to Shabbat? With no intentional wind down. Let's say they don't, they just gotta they come home, boom, that's it, and then it's like Shabbat, boom, okay. So think like, the front steps, the heavy doors, the tight aisles, maybe for the person who is attending shul on Shabbat, and maybe it's not as conducive. We might encounter another pain point like the Hebrew only, or maybe the print is too small and um, the low light, right? Like some synagogues feel like a museum sometimes, right? And then there are also things like some unspoken rules, social rules about like when to speak, when to sing, right? Or when to like endure to suffer through, because sometimes that's an unspoken rule. And none of that is required by halakha, right? Like nobody says you have to read Hebrew in the dark. Nothing like that was ever said. Okay, but these could be barriers to what people are trying to engage. And even very little of it is even minhag, right? Tradition. It's like it's something else. Automatic pilot. Maybe we're discovering a new thing, like stuff. It's just what we're doing at the current moment, right? It's the current system. And it's mostly unexamined design Shabbat, like which is cool. So in this idea of Shabbat by design, I started to think about some interventions, right, and started to kind of map them into the process. So I thought, okay, we definitely need a pre-Shabbat wind down like card or like a micro ritual or like something that like helps you make the transition to go from one place to the other. Right. This is something that like I would like to do because sometimes like here's what I do is like I'll sundown will go. I have like a little neon light that says Shabbat, and I turn that on. And it's nice because it's like the only light I put on, and then we light the candles. But I usually send a text that says Shabbos, and like everybody's meant to like come, like the Avengers, it's like what we do. But everybody usually just chills before we do Shabbat, and then we eat, and then, folks can kind of do what they wish after. Sometimes we play games as a family, but mostly we chill, because we've had school and work and all that. And we're tired, right? And Friday night is like, whew, it's a good place to make that happen. So adding that initial wind down micro ritual is something that like I thought, oh, that's a good idea, right? Another thing is, for some of these other folks here in the personas was like thinking about things, being bilingual, right? We're using transliteration instead of just translation, so that way people could say the Latinized version of the Hebrew, right, and start to become comfortable with how that's even showing that. A lot of times they show the Hebrew, the transliteration, and all separate. Maybe it's cool to show it all at once. The Talmud is actually a brilliant layout when you think about it, because like the text surrounds like an onion, like the Mishnah, right? The center text in the middle, the actual Torah text, and that way, then like that kind of concentric echoing is interesting. So like we could do similar things inside of a like a little prayer handout that family members or folks in a shul could have, and I think that could really help with the Friday night flow. How about even visualizing stuff like that? What if, I know we have to say it, but like what if there was some sort of image that wasn't just like a cup, that like maybe had, I don't know, information graphics or like some sort of visual that like helped connect a metaphor. Yeah, these are things that you could create and then could be there and then could be very easily explained to make a connection. I think that could be really, really great. And then last thing was like more of a physical thing was that like tables and bima, right? The bimot, the lectern, right? The podium could be designed from like a wheelchair first perspective. Like what would be one that could work for both, uh, uh, you know, abled standing and then folks needing extra support. Yeah, I think those are things that really should be brought in. And uh, a summarizing question here, right, is like how much inclusion can we unlock just by working in the design space without touching the halakhic spine, right, the core of Shabbat at all, right? So that feels like very doable, very easy that we could make happen, right? How could we do these things? Like, so for example, what if somebody who has accessibility needs, but then is in a home that then shuts the power, right? What can they do to make sure that like they could continue having like a support and like a life with things that do need electricity, but that they're also not then violating halakha, right? That's some communities halakha in terms of using electricity, right? So stuff like that is, uh, you know, the open space where we could really spend time iterating and designing all of that. So I love that, right? It's like so many ideas. So think for yourself, what is it within your community and your space? Make a persona. What are your needs, right? Where are pain points? So these are things that everybody and every one of us can do right now, right? Like what do you love about Shabbat? And what do you feel like is not the best, but like we could improve? And then those are things to act upon. That's where you put design ideas, right? Iteration into those things. You could evolve or you could reinvent. Obviously, evolution is easier in terms of like moving things, in terms of sketching and feeling, because coming up with new, well, that requires like a fundamental understanding of so much. So that's like the next stage is like creating a brand new, right? And this gave me a really strong conviction. Okay, um, is that accessibility is not an aesthetic preference or this optional upgrade. It's not like a nice thing to have. It is a mitzvah, right? When you make the mitzvah more accessible to people who need it, you elevate the mitzvah. You beautify the mitzvah. You hidor mitzvah, right? You absolutely take it to another wonderful place. So, as a designer, I feel this conviction when I'm making websites and posters and everything in terms of accessibility and connecting with the greater community, not just because I have to, because it's the law, right? But because I know that I'm making something more accessible to the world. People learn greater, are more empowered, see themselves in it, just makes life better. Okay. I don't want to make things just be in this typical type of sense, mainstream, right? Status quo. That's not working right now. So as a designer, I have to say enough, right? And take it to the next level. So right there, give yourself permission. All right. Accessibility is not something that's optional. It is how to elevate a mitzvah. Okay. It is really, really wonderful. So when you think about somebody who can't physically enter or cannot cognitively connect or follow something or can't socially decode what the hell is going on in this space, right? That's not a, UX bug, right? It frankly, it's a spiritual and ethical failure, right? It's like, well, we're just doing it this way, and like, well, the world's not built for you, boo. Okay, so what we're going to change everything for you? Like that seems to be the attitude, right? Maybe not explicitly, but people kind of just go, well, okay, well, that's how it is. So let's just keep on keeping on. And that's the issue, right? That's really where we need to see and say, with permission, this is how we elevate the mitzvah, right? How we hidor mitzvah. Um, and, if we really believe and really say, I believe here that every human being carries Tselem Elohim, right? Which is the image of the divine, then things like ramps and font sizes and translations into other languages and sensory friendly environments, those are not neutral. Okay, right? If everybody has a spark and everybody has what to offer, we can't let the physical issues in this world be what then limits somebody spiritually. Okay, that right there is what I'm saying when I say it's a spiritual and ethical failure, right? In that sense, so we got to really address that. That's really, really what's important, right? Um, so these become midrash. These become things on who we think, right? We recenter who we think that Hashem shows up for, right? Is it just the people who don't face challenges physically daily? Are you the most blessed, right? Is it your job to you know or is it your job to help build a society, right? So that way, when everything's brought up to an equitable scale, then the contributions of folks who are maybe struggling can elevate too, right? And that comes back towards you. We haven't realized that stuff yet. Maybe I'm pie in the sky here with the way I sound, but y'all, I'm a designer and I know why we do these things and why we have these things because human nature, like sometimes like pushes us in a different direction. Okay. It like we don't rise up to the occasion in a way that like it really needs to happen. Okay. We don't because it's like it's cheaper to go the other way. It's cheaper, it's like, oh, it's only a small community. And that's how we act. Right. And it's unfortunate. So, right, we just have to put things in perspective. So in my Shabbat case study and in the coming House class, I'm going to put accessibility right in the middle of this design conversation. Right? It's not the thing that we like after we design, then we add it. I'm going to ask like, okay, how can now users who can't do X, Y, or Z access and do what you're proposing? Right? That's going to be a question that accessibility gut check that we'll do, and we'll ground that in an ethical framework, okay, and to think about like, all right, well, oh, okay, yeah, this might bump into that, but then, all right, but we want to elevate, so like, you start to see like it's math. It's like a formula of like negotiation to figure out, well, where's this mitzvah going to land, right? After we play with the logic of all these different things. Okay, so we're going to really have it as not the thing we tack on, but it becomes our criterion for whether or not our speculative our divergent ideas, my geodesic sukkah, right, or my futuristic mezuzah that I collaborated on, are actually faithful to Jewish values, or are they art projects? Are they something else? Like I mentioned before, as creatives, we can push things into different areas, and that's okay. We're allowed to do that as long as we're clear about what we're making happen. Are we intentionally going for something that is very Jewish, and we're trying to push into the world and say it's good, do it. Here's another mezuzah, but it doesn't follow halakhic and minhagic rules, right, and practices and traditions? Okay. Or is it like in the case of what I did with my cohort and collaborators? We made this art project. We knew that that wasn't going to be halakhic, but we wanted to do it because it would embody the place, right? The space and place that we were in, right? At the Elsewhere Museum. We wanted that to really be like a vessel, and a very Jewish one in that sense. Um, so taking a big step back here, um, these are really things that I'm now starting to create as step-based instructional workflows that are coming from Jewish futurism, right? Uh, Again, it's Jewish futurism is so much more than me illustrating gadgets from the future that may do X, Y, or Z. That's not what it's about, right? It's really thinking about designing forwardly with Jewish memory and ethics, okay? And with the goal of the continuity, right? As my friend Shai Davidai said so eloquently on our conversation a few episodes back, that the continuity of Jewish existence, right, being the goal, and that's absolutely in there as far as where Jewish futurism goes now with this ethical and halakhic framework at its core. And Shabbat already does so much of this. It takes a vision of a just rested world, and rehearses it every 7 days, right? That's it. It really addresses a human need, right? And think about how we have modern work laws now. A lot of those like really feel and sound like Shabbat, because it's not profitable to, or the most profitable to have your workers have a day off, right? If they work every day, well, then you're profitable every day. You can take a day off if you're the business owner, right? But what happens to those people? To what end is the question. So the day off now becomes, well, the worker can work a long time and they can make the company profitable for a long time, right? If they can get a day of rest, and that's good, and they'll work better when they're rested, and all that stuff like makes sense for business and it makes sense for people. So all of a sudden now it's like, oh, okay, that's great. Let's go ahead and do that. That works. And you know, looking back on Jewish history, it's really full of a lot of radical redesign moments. And you think about like just sweeping, overarching here. We went from a temple to a text, right? We went from sacrificial practice to prayer, right? And then we went from a land-centered existencehood to portable, okay, right? So a lot of things have really, really changed in the life of Jewish people in the way that we are Jewish. And those were necessary acts of creativity. They're risky, but deeply grounded design. I mean, how do you go from the Beit HaMikdash, right, the sacrificial temple, to having a close connection with Hashem, right? From the first generation of the Mishkan, right? The folks traveling in the desert, right? The Aaron, Moses, Betzalel, the many artisans, Miriam, right? All these folks. Uh, and then now all of a sudden, uh, we can't, right? Like the temple's destroyed. We've been dispersed to all these places. Some stayed, right? Like we have to also acknowledge the fact that many Jews like figured out how to stay in the land and continued their existence there and practiced Judaism even while the majority of the nation was exiled, right? The civilization exiled to other parts of the world. And like man, these were big, big things. So Judaism continued, the Jewish people continued through design. They redesigned themselves to endure, right? And that was with their goal, the telos, right? To what end? Which was the continuity of the Jewish people into the future, right? Whatever shape, form they take. That seems to be like our MO, is that like we'll take something. It's like, all right, we don't, it doesn't have to be perfect. Let's just take it so we can start to do good things. We can start to rebuild and become something, right? That's a really important part of really like why I think this is just so absolutely beautiful. The traditional language we use, I've been saying here, is Hidor Mitzvah, which is to beautify a commandment. And that comes through craft and care, particular mitzvah, something that you do, a deed. um, and then working with speculative objects and Shabbat user experience. I started to think about my Hidor Olam phrase, right? So like when we're that you have Tikkun Olam and Hidor Mitzvah, I took those two phrases and I combined them as a way to really exemplify what is this idea of Jewish spirituality and Jewish creativity and Jewish education, all that intersection. There was a special new space, right? A core, a nucleus where those things came together. I needed that to have overlap, right? So Hidor Olam is what it is, and that's my phrase. So I'm thinking about using this system that beautifies mitzvot. It's a way. All right, cool. Here's a mitzvot. Let's beautify. Here's a system I can use. All right, what do I need? Okay. And you start to go through the parameters, the criteria, and the framework, and it's like, oh, okay, we can actually do something here, right? We can actually be effective, versus like rolling the dice and maybe seeing what happens. Okay, it helps us set intention, and I think that's a really, really important thing. Why do you want to reinvent the ritual, right? Really, really understand why. You can ask 5 whys. I love that from marketing, self-help, and user experience design, graphic design type of thinking books, where you can ask 5 whys, right? Ask 5 unique why questions about something, and if it can survive those 5, you got something really good there, right? That's actually like a strong concept or something that is resonating and has pith, right? Which I think is really important when trying to find what a great design is. So, let's think for a second here, right? That we're just not looking at a kiddish cup by itself and saying, let's remake that, right? Let's make it wood or let's make it glow or something. That's not what we're doing. But like, think something more like a tweak. What is the way it gets to the table? Is that a special thing? Can it go on parade, right? What is the accessibility of the space around it? Can anybody grab it, with any ability level? Um, what is the clarity of the story around it? Do we know from where it comes, right? Like, do we know why? Do we know why it's held a certain way? Why wine? The words we say. And then, do we make room for bodies and minds that weren't originally centered when these rituals first were created, right? We didn't know about, there weren't wheelchairs at the time. There weren't neurodivergent understanding at the time. So what do we do, to help now that we have this greater understanding, right? That's a really important thing. And the three-layer framework is one way to make this practice happen with integrity, right? With doing Hidur Olam with full integrity. So we honor halacha as the boundary, as the outer space upon which the sand is in the box. We treat minhag with literacy and respect, right? We look at it, we research it, we understand the examples, right? And see what works and what doesn't. We're critical, and we apply the lessons to our own design. And then we use the design space, the target, the center, boldly and imaginatively with accessibility and ethics at the core, right? So the needs, that's the framework. That's the kind of framework that goes around the design space before it becomes minhag. So I always think about it as rippling. Like, your effort is always trying to hit the bullseye. You hit the bullseye, and then it echoes and ripples outwards like in water, right? A ripple. And then it starts to enter into the minhag space, and over time and practice, it becomes minhag, right? And like, halakha doesn't change really too much, but there is a space where there's tension there. So every single one of these realms has its own little parameter space, or like a little threshold between halakha and then minhag and the design space. So I love that visual, and excited to draw it up, right, and show y'all in classes and things like that as things come to be, right, as my Lairhouse class happens and other things online. And that's the work I'm inviting everybody, y'all, to do, right, in this podcast, in the class I just gave with Judaism Unbound, the session, and then my upcoming course with the Lairhouse, is to really be speculative ritual designers who actually know where the boundaries are, right? Where are the limits, right? Like, when you ask the question telos, right? What is the telos of Jewish ritual design? Well, um, I'll see what I don't want it to have been done already, so I don't want it to repeat what's in the minhag. And then also, does it bounce into or dispute or do something against halacha? Again, questions you want to keep within what's going on. And then we said before, you can go outside of that, right? But it has to be about intention. If your intention is to create something that is for Jews and Jewish people, right, to be used as like a legitimate thing, like a mezuzah or whatever for their home, that would be misrepresented if you gave them your artistic one that didn't have the follow halacha, right? But if you said, well, it's not halacha, and you make that clear, okay, you can say it's art. Well, that's a different story altogether, right? That is absolutely something that can be done, right? So, friends, I hope this like really helps kind of help make things clear. Is you got to be very clear at the beginning about what it is that you want to do. First intention, right? Then what? Who is this for? What do they need? What are their pain points? Okay, what's the halacha? What's the minhag? And then where's open space for us to make attempts, right? To see where we can do things. Build it, test it, apply the learning, right, to the next iteration, and do it until it's done. That's how this process really goes. All right, so let's land this here, to y'all with a few invitations. Okay, I want to invite everybody here to think about a couple things, right? So firstly, I want you to pick one ritual, one Jewish ritual in your life that you're a part of, and it can be Jewish or otherwise, right? And I want you to sit down and map it out as a journey, right? Like, what does it look like from the beginning to the middle to the end? What are the major milestone parts as you go through? Okay. So from first contact to the moment, people go home, right? Like, what does it look like from, cover to cover? Think about, like, where does it soar and fly, right? Where does it break and crumble and get bumpy a little bit? And then, like, who kind of quietly opts out if uh, you know, uh, they're tacitly consenting to being involved, right? Like, think about your kids, for example. My kids, like, they don't always want to do the prayers. They don't always want to speak up. There's things like that they're like, I'd rather. They blend in like Homer Simpson into the bushes, right? In the meme. Really cool metaphor to think about. All right, and secondly, here is I want you to draw your own version of the three layers. Like, come up with your own image of what the three layers are for Jewish ritual design, right? So we said it was the outer ring is halacha, the next ring is the minhag, the tradition, and then in the inside is the actual design space. So it's like a target, like concentric circles. Okay, um, and I want you to name for you, like, what is truly non-negotiable. What is your halacha, right? What what's inherited from patterns and minhag, and then what is like open, undiscovered space, for you. Like, that could be really great. So even that act right there will change the way you see the ritual, like immediately, right? So that's really cool. Is just map it out. Like, what about Shabbat has to stay, and or the ritual that you're thinking about. What has been done that maybe has been changing or an evolution or really cool, and then where is there an opportunity? All right, that's how it goes. And if you experiment with any of this, right? If you prototype a new Shabbat flow, or if you kind of build like a brand new speculative object like I have, or take an old practice and then update it to new ethics, right? New ethics, social ethics standards. I would love to hear about it, right? If your Seder plate has more things than ever, right? Or if your Shabbat has all sorts of wild things, then, like, please share it. I think that would be a fantastic thing. So, friends, I hope this has been an interesting kind of open lab session and episode today, where we've just been kind of unpacking some of the things that I've been exploring lately. And a lot of these things are new to me, and are a lot of roads converging, a lot of worlds in my world, for lack of a better term, that are starting to overlap, and I'm really starting to, like, crystallize and realize and just appreciate y'all being on the ride with me. So, friends, I'm Mike Wirth, and this has been the Jewish Futurism Lab. We're talking about the UX of Jewish ritual design, and yeah, I will see you guys next time and in the future. Bezrat Hashem.